I first gained the desire to read Erik Larsen's book after hearing that Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio were looking to make a film from it. It is concerned with serial killer H Holmes, who used his charm and his charisma to lure victims, mostly young, impressionable women, to their deaths using his elaborately built murder castle during the first World's Fair in Chicago. Now, I wasn't aware that most of the book is actually concerned with the building of the World's Fair. That's what the majority of the book is about. The issues, the politics, the workplace deaths, the infighting, the planning of one of America's greatest spectacles, the World's Fair. So you come for the killer, but you get the fair. It follows Daniel Burnham, the chief architect behind the fair, and his mission to get America's answer to the Eiffel Tower prepared for the seemingly impossible deadline he's been presented with. The story is intercut with passages from H Holmes' storyline, completely separate from Burnham's other than taking place at the same time. The fair storyline outmuscles Holmes by I'd say around 4-1 in terms of the book's content, and it is very late on, page 275 in fact of the copy I was reading, where a chapter starts with the phrase "and so it began" in reference to Holmes' killing spree. So essentially, you come for America's Jack the Ripper with his scheming and his killing in his custom-made hotel of death, and for the most part you instead get elderly, top hat wearing gentlemen sitting around tables with architecture drawings, discussing their construction plans. And you know what? It's really not that bad. The story of the fair's construction is fascinating. Some of the events that went on, the obstacles that these men faced and their defiant responses are incredible and make for a brilliant read. For sure, these small segments that the book teases us with of Holmes' storyline are more interesting, but that doesn't mean Burnham and Co.'s tale isn't worth a read. It's like going into a restaurant and ordering chicken, but instead being told you can have half a chicken, and before you do so you have to eat this lamb. Yes, it's not what I came for, but lamb is still great. Larsen's attention to detail is staggering. Specific dates, times, names and such provide undeniable support for the novel's truthfulness, at least to the extent of what history has left to us. The amount of research that must have gone into his novel is mind-boggling. In fact, he delivers an epilogue where he actually goes into this and leaves us with details of his studies and researches. His hypnotic ability as a storyteller is proven by my unwillingness to put the book down. He has a real way with the flowing of the writing. The words dart and dance whilst they build vivid and tangible images in your head. It feels like you are right there whilst the architects argue and discuss in Burnham's cabin. It feels like you are right out there in the ground when George Washington Gale Ferris Jr.'s Ferris wheel is being lifted up and goes on its first terrifying circulation. There are loads of small background characters who might only appear in one paragraph, and we share their specific story in regards to the World Fair. There's so much splendour, so much wonder in this entire story, and with a single gush of wind, Burnham's team can find themselves in a nightmare of workplace fires and collapsing buildings. It felt both exhausting and fulfilling being part of this journey of the construction of the fair, the might of its opening and running, and the mourning of its eventual demise. It's history what we're reading here, and yet at times it reads like a fairy tale. And then you have the added bonus of Holmes. Larsen dedicates heaps and heaps of pages to the construction of the fair, and might stingily spare but a few paragraphs to Holmes' sinister tale, in between the story of the construction of the fair. It keeps you wanting and waiting, savouring the little you are given until Holmes' storyline takes dominance right at the end of the novel, and you almost wish it hadn't when it is revealed just how much of a psycho this guy was. Power seems to have been his main game. He didn't particularly seem to enjoy killing, it was just knowing that he had the power of killing and the power of choosing how it was done, how his victims were ended, and the fact that he could end them in the first place. Many of his kills seem nothing more than playful games to him, a private little joke that he shares with himself. There's a particularly chilling part where Holmes cheerfully walks in with his sister-in-law throughout his hotel, before tricking her into being locked into a small room where he begins to have gas pumped into, slowly robbing her of her oxygen. He gains great pleasure in knowing he could turn off the gas, burst through the door and take the woman in his arms as the saviour of the moment. Or remove a gas plane and smile down at her to show her that her being locked in is no accident. Or do a number of other things, like simply waiting for the woman to die, which is the option he chooses. Larsen really sells it, and it's delightfully sickening. The book is amazing. It is amazing how the fair was able to flourish, let alone exist, after you read what went into it. It is amazing how Holmes managed to kill so many people with no police scrutiny. It is amazing how one man managed to charm so many women in the first place. There's so much in this book, so much information, so much showcase of the ingenuity and inventiveness of man, and yet so much evil. There's actually a third story that appears, one that concludes the novel. This one follows the detective who eventually brings down Holmes and his investigation of his crimes. Changing the perspective proves to be yet another masterful storytelling tactic from Larson, as the final few chapters read like a great mini detective story. Fitting, given Herman Webster Mudgett changed his name to H. H. Holmes. In the same year, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle released his first Sherlock Holmes novel. Burnham is essentially presented as the idea of good. He seemingly doesn't have any major flaws, and essentially from what he achieves in the novel, he propels mankind, forwarding through technological achievements and advancements. It's a good character to focus on as the flip side to Holmes, which amplifies the terribleness of his crimes, if that's possible. With all this charming and intelligent man achieving in his life is the taking of it. There's a fair bit of name dropping in the novel. I'm not heavily invested in American history, but even I recognize names like Thomas Edison, Walt Disney and the Titanic. It makes for some good, "oh, I recognize that name" moments. I really admire how Larson delivers a history lesson on something before reading the book I had no interest in, but presents it in such a way that it's like you're on a roller coaster ride. The novel is dynamic and vibrant and comprehensively researched. It's sad in places and wondrous in others. I thought it was well worth my time. I give it an 8 out of 10.